Welcome to Inside the Middle East, program covering all the developments taking place in the Middle East region with a deep analysis to all the developments taking place there. And in today's edition, we are going to talk about the repercussions of the current Iranian-American war and its impact on the world trade and the world oil prices and world economy. That would be the topic for our discussion for today, but that would be after this short break.
The Tigris and Euphrates are the two great rivers of Western Asia. Both begin in the mountains of eastern Turkey and flow southeast across Syria and Iraq. After running parallel for hundreds of kilometers, they meet near the town of El Qurna to form a Shatt al-Arab, which flows into the Persian Gulf. Along the way, they pass through historic cities, including Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra. For thousands of years, these rivers have supported communities across the region. They provide water for drinking, agriculture, and industry. The land between them, once called Mesopotamia, remains one of Iraq's most fertile areas, producing wheat, barley, dates, and vegetables. Fishing boats work the waterways, and in the southern marches, neat houses and wetlands support local wildlife and traditional ways of life. The Tigris and Euphrates are more than waterways. They are at the heart of one of the world's oldest civilizations. The kingdoms of Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria are developed on their banks. Today, the rivers are part of daily life. Markets line their shores, the bridges connect neighborhoods, and families gather along their banks in the evening. From the Turkish highlands to the Gulf, they continue to shape the landscape, the economy, and the identity of the region.
And now the regional news bulletin, where U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that he will cancel the attacks on Iran after he indicated that a rough framework of a deal had been actually reached. The U.S. President pointed out that the deal would include the immediate, complete and total opening of the Strait of Hormuz and an end to Iran nuclear reach. Iran Foreign Minister warned of a U.S. attack against any adventurous action. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi on Saturday warned the U.S. against any dangerous action in separate calls with senior officials from Turkey, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Araghchi told Saudi Foreign Minister that any attacks by the U.S. or Israel would be met with a proportionate response. Egypt pursued long-term LNG deal to bolster the energy security. Over the past decade, Egypt has worked steadily to meet its natural gas needs by ramping up domestic production and turning to the international supplies. In recent days, Cairo has held talks with major energy companies, including Shell, Total Energy, to lock in long-term liquefied natural gas agreement. According to the news reports, Egypt is in advanced negotiations to buy between 15 to 18 LNG cargoes each month for at least the next 3 years. Two years after a decisive monetary policy arrest pulled Egypt back from the brink of severe foreign exchange starvation, the nation's macroeconomic picture has transformed dramatically since March 2024. Thanks to the monetary policy arrest over the past 2 years, this month the country's net international reserves stood at a record of 55.07 billion, even as the United States and Iran traded fresh strikes. And non-oil export rose to 17% in 2025 to 48.6 billion, led by building materials, chemicals and fertilizers, and a resurgence of gold trade. The State Divestment Program has temporarily listed US dollar of its 30% targeted companies on the Egyptian exchange and raised close to 5.9 billion since 2022. And Cairo drafting economic plan for future IMF ties. The Egyptian government is putting together a comprehensive national economic program to steer the country once its current agreement with the International Monetary Fund ends. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli has recently announced that a strategy is being developed in close coordination with senior officials from the Central Bank of Egypt. The initiative followed President Sisi's recent directives at the inauguration of the Strategic Command headquarters in the new capital. He called for the next phase to shift from economic reform to improving welfare, prosperity and living standards for the ordinary Egyptians. The new program will build on the national narrative for comprehensive development and Egypt Vision 2030. And now we will move to the main topic for our discussion for today's edition, where we are going to tackle the Iranian-American war and its impact on the navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and the supply chain, as well as the world economy.
The Tigris and Euphrates are the two great rivers of Western Asia. Both begin in the mountains of eastern Turkey and flow southeast across Syria and Iraq. After running parallel for hundreds of kilometers, they meet near the town of El Qurna to form a Shatt al-Arab, which flows into the Persian Gulf. Along the way, they pass through historic cities, including Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra. For thousands of years, these rivers have supported communities across the region. They provide water for drinking, agriculture, and industry. The land between them, once called Mesopotamia, remains one of Iraq's most fertile areas, producing wheat, barley, dates, and vegetables. Fishing boats work the waterways, and in the southern marches, neat houses and wetlands support local wildlife and traditional ways of life. The Tigris and Euphrates are more than waterways. They are at the heart of one of the world's oldest civilizations. The kingdoms of Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria are developed on their banks. Today, the rivers are part of daily life. Markets line their shores, the bridges connect neighborhoods, and families gather along their banks in the evening. From the Turkish highlands to the Gulf, they continue to shape the landscape, the economy, and the identity of the region.
Welcome back. To shed more light on the navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and how the current war is affecting the navigation, the security of navigation and the world economy, you are very much delighted to be joined over the phone by our very dear guest, Dr. Monica William, Professor of International Relations. Good afternoon to you, Dr. William.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today.
It's our pleasure always. Dr. William, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that he will cancel the attack on Iran after he indicated that a rough framework of a deal had been reached. How do you see the implication of such statement by the U.S. President on the navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and, of course, on the world market and energy prices?
Of course, President Donald Trump's decision to cancel, or I guess it's postponed, if we can say, to be accurate, military strikes, which of course shouldn't be necessarily be interpreted as a sign of weakness or change in a strategic objective. Rather, it would reflect a broader cost-benefit calculation in which political and military and economic consideration outweigh to the potential gains of immediate escalation. First of all, the United States may conclude that additional airstrikes would produce damaging military returns after extensive attacks on key military and energy-related infrastructures. Of course, there is a lot of secret reports which assure that Donald Trump, in collaboration with Israel, will attack or the energy-related infrastructure. The remaining targets may offer limited strategic value, while, of course, it's increasingly the risk of Iranian retention. On the other side, the United States is likely to seek to avoid wider regional conflict. Any large-scale escalation could prompt Iran to respond through alternative means, including attacks on U.S. bases in Gulf countries, and of course, missile strikes and cyber operation and disruption to maritime traffic in a Strait of Hormuz. And of course, remember it's part of its recent tactics. And of course, such actions could transfer a limited campaign into a prolonged regional war. Of course, it's part, or the third reason, it's part of your question. Energy market stability remain major consideration for Donald Trump. So any disruption to shipping in Strait of Hormuz triggered a sharp increase in global oil prices, which of course reached last week to 100 for 1 barrel, and it's fueling the inflation and placing additional pressure on U.S. and the global economy. And for any U.S. administration, avoiding any energy shock is a second strategic priority, specifically in this time. We have on next November, the midterm elections. And of course, this is why that Trump is configured to project the image of a leader who achieves strategic objective without becoming in a long-term war. Through his political term, he repeatedly criticized constantly military intervention in Middle East, while emphasized the use of economic pressure, sanctions, and limited military action to compel and return to negotiate.
Dr. William, also the U.S. President pointed out that the deal that he's expecting to seal would include immediate, complete, and total opening of the Strait of Hormuz and an end to Iran's nuclear threats. How do you see the statement by the American president, and how do you evaluate its impact also on the navigation, the security of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz? And do you expect actually the Iranian to accept such a deal? How do you see also the control over the Strait of Hormuz would be?
Let's start with the second part of your question. For Iran, its Strait of Hormuz function less a battlefield and more as a political bargaining tool. Iran decision makers understand that disruption global energy supply would affect the global or major energy importing economy in Europe and Asia and of course in the United States. So a sustained increase in oil prices would fuel inflation and disrupt supply chain and impose additional political force on governments supporting military action against Iran, of course, and on United States allies, especially in our countries, and of course in Europe and Asia. In this regard, the Strait of Hormuz is one of Iran's most effective deterrence mechanisms. However, Iran also recognized the risk associated with a complete closure of the waterway. Such an action would almost certainly provoke a large-scale international military response led by the United States and, of course, by Israel and supported by regional and global partners with economic interests depend on uninterrupted maritime trade. So Iran is more likely to pursue a calibrated strategy of controlled escalation, employed threat, limited naval incidents, and temporary disruption rather than, of course, prolonged blockade. This approach enables Iran to maximize its strategic pressure while, on the other side, minimize the likelihood of trigger and overwhelming militarization. And, of course, on the other side, or if we can just through what's happening on Trump's front, this approach or his approach to strike and threats targeting conventional military capabilities to undermine the economic foundation, and he stopped or postponed, as we said earlier, this airstrike operation, and he tried to sustain Iran defense establishment, particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Strikes designed to destroy infrastructure and to increase the economic and political costs of the conflict and weaken Iran's operational capacity and intensify domestic pressure on Iran's leadership. This approach aligns with the broader strategy of Trump, combining military pressure with economic and targeting energy facilities would afford reduce Iran's ability to generate oil and gas revenues and constrain government finance and limit its capability to fund the military operation and the regional proxy network. And it's a very important part. Consequently, energy infrastructure becomes a strategic objective, if we can say, with significant extent far beyond immediate battlefield effect.
Yes, of course, from the current scenario, we are expecting to witness talks and agreements between both sides regarding very important and crucial issues. So are we going to witness security for the security of navigation, guarantees for the safety and security of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and for Bab el-Mandab as well, for the world trade and the navigation of the international ships?
If we can tackle with the scenarios of what will happen, let's assume that even our negotiating in this part affecting the strategic perspective. Negotiation and military operation aren't mutually exclusive. Military force serve a tool to strengthen diplomatic leverage, and of course this will not replace diplomacy altogether. The key question is not whether negotiations begin. As we say, there is our negotiations, even if try to tackle more closer, not states may continue the limited pressure strikes against muscle sites, drone infrastructures, and the RGC facilities, and this objective would not be overthrow the Iranian regime, but to maintain the military pressure and improve the negotiations for the United States position. In this scenario, diplomacy and military forces proceed at the same time. The second scenario is that temporary pause followed by escalation. The United States would suspend a major operation to test Iran's willingness to negotiate. However, if Iran refused key demands such as you said, restriction on missile capabilities or regional military activities, or its domination on Strait of Hormuz, the United States could quickly resume air operation. Here, the pause function as a diplomatic opportunity, not a permanent ceasefire. The third scenario is the escalation to a de-escalation strategy that states may conduct one final wave of high intensified strike before negotiation and reach a defensive phase. I guess it's part where this will be the probability scenario. The purpose to maximize military pressure and weaken Iran's bargaining position before entering substitute talks, and this approach employed in previous international crises where military force was used to shape negotiation dynamics rather than achieve outright victory.
Indeed. Dr. Monica Williams, our Professor of International Relations, thank you so much for your precious input and for being our guest for today. And with that, we come to the end of this edition from Inside the Middle East.